I've been doing art since I could hold a pencil, and I learned to draw primarily from copying photographs. Do a lot of ornamentation work in my day-to-day business. I do mostly lettering, monograms, inscriptions, a lot of trophy work, baby cups inside of wedding bands, trays, and that type of stuff. Graphics, but with a very sharp blade. I'm Rose Duke, and I started engraving at Steve Silver. I started working for Steve Silver in '78. It's an ad in the paper for Steve for a finisher, and I didn't know what a finisher was, but I went in and put in an application. A finisher is somebody who polishes all day long. They stand in front of a polishing lathe and polish pewter or silver or the many items that were made there. And the next thing I knew, I got transferred to the engraving department with no idea of what I was getting myself into. I worked for Steve on and off for about 20 years, and in between I worked for the Jenkins High School Ring Company as a master model maker and hand engraver there. And then in between those jobs, I also did various work in t-shirt silk screening, which taught me a lot about graphics and layout design, which is an integral part of actually being an engraver. It's done with an assortment of very sharp tools. You have to learn how to sharpen your tools and how to operate the block, which is a special kind of vise that we use to hold the work. When you cut like strip lettering, the tool is actually on a bias. It leans over a little bit, like the way a road might be banked. And when you're cutting, there's actually turning the work to create various shapes and depths, thins and thicks in the cut, and they couldn't figure out how to teach a left-handed person how to do that. Men did the lettering, women did the flatware patterns, because it was a matter of, they didn't pay women as much. And when you're working production and you're doing thousands of pieces a day, the bottom line is how much it's going to cost to do that. And when I was first there as an engraver, they told me point blank they wouldn't teach me to do lettering. They didn't want to teach me how to sharpen my tools. And one day when the boss wasn't there, one of the other men showed me how to sharpen my tools. 2 weeks later, I came in with my own sharpening setup. It's a special device called a crocker that holds the tool at a specific angle and the sharpening stone. I don't think it was so much as to keep knowledge away from women as just the bottom financial dollar. Everybody I worked with was from Baltimore. You had Steve Silver and you had Kirk Silver, and Kirk was actually known for the repose pattern, but Steve has been like the silver company that's lasted the longest in Maryland. And silver was a really big thing in the South. Every woman had her own flatware pattern, and generally it would pass on to the daughter or the daughters-in-law, and having sterling was a really big deal down south, even more so than it is, Maryland is considered more south as far as that's concerned than regions like New York. It engraves beautifully. You can hammer it and raise it to various shapes. It's very malleable metal, so they had a technique called spinning where they actually would put metal on a lathe. Kind of like wood turning, only instead of cutting the metal, they're actually pushing the metal over various forms to make things like the little vase there and those goblets. Things like the trays were spun on a lathe. Practice were working on pewter, because pewter is very inexpensive. It cuts like silver, only smoother. And once the apprentice's hands muscle up, they can move on to something harder like copper or brass. The need to make art is a strong desire to make something out of nothing. I find if I'm not making some sort of art, if I'm not doing this, if I'm not doing my paintings, if I'm not knitting, all this is like bottled up inside of me and it's not going anywhere, and it's kind of an insanity, this need to make something.